Hi everybody, like I always say, Namaskara everyone. Andariki Namaskaram, Ellargu Swagatam, and a very warm welcome to my own channel that is Navamita Ma'am Chemistry. This is a permanent solution and your one-stop solution if you want to study in English and if you want to study chemistry. All right, so today's session is going to be DNF block, and let's try to finish it within 1 hour. We should be able to because this chapter is very small. And one major concern that many students they face regarding this chapter is the potassium dichromate and the potassium permanganate and their reaction. So let's go and let's start with this chapter and let's finish it quickly. All right, yes. Okay, now the definition. The first thing that we need to study in this chapter is the definition. That means what are the D block elements and what are the transition elements. You must have noticed that these elements, the elements that are present in the D block, they are also called as transition elements. Now, everything is written right here. Why have I written? Please trust me, everybody. Why have I written everything and I have come up? Because we need to finish this chapter in 1 hour. All right. Yes. Otherwise, I could write it down and I could teach you. But while I'm writing down, that's a plain simple time waste for you all, everybody. So it's written here. So let's take a look at it, everybody. So what is the definition? The definition says that the elements in which the last differentiating electron, that means the last electron that is going to enter a orbit, or if it is going to enter a shell, it is going to enter which shell? It is going to enter the d orbital. It is going to enter the d orbital, everybody, and that is why they are called as d elements. What are they called as? They are called as d block elements. Now, in the D block elements, you must have also noticed that these guys, these people, they're called as transition elements. Let's learn the definition of transition elements. So, you notice that a transition element may also be defined as the element which has partially filled d orbital in their ground state or most stable oxidation state. And therefore, what happens is we get to know that zinc, cadmium and mercury, these three elements, they are not transition elements. What are they not? They are not transition elements. However, yes, absolutely, yes, they are D block elements. Now, the question that comes in your mind is that, ma'am, why are they not transition elements? So, bache log, why are they not transition elements? Because see, what is written here? It's written here that it has partially filled D orbital. Now, if you look at the electronic configuration of zinc, cadmium and mercury, you will find that these guys have completely filled D block elements. They have completely filled D orbitals, and because of that reason, they are not D block. They are not transition elements, but they are D block elements for sure. Okay, now based on this, numerous questions have come in your JE as well as in your NEET. So make sure that you know the concept here. Okay. Now let's understand the position of D block elements in a periodic table. So if you look at the periodic table, which is right here, in this periodic table, yes, in the periodic table, what will you find? In the periodic table, you will definitely find that right in the middle, this blue color part, this is your D block elements, right? So this is the part where they are present. This is the part where they are present. Do you understand this much? Yes. All right, everybody, this is the position. So, and we have just learned that they are also called as transition elements. Now, when you look at their properties, you find out that from S block to P block, when you are traveling from S block to P block, their properties, it transitions from S to P block. So, this, my dear students, this is your D block elements. This is the position of D block elements. Come here. You have four different series of D block element. This is the first series. This is the first transition series, which is also called as the 3D series. Why do we call it to be as 3D series, my dear students? Why do we call it to be 3D series? Because the last electron is going to enter the 3D orbital. That's why. So the fourth period where scandium to zinc, what do you have? Scandium, titanium, vanadium, chromium, manganese, iron, cobalt, nickel, copper, zinc. These 10 elements, they form the first transition series and they are called as 3D series. The next one, from yttrium to cadmium, is the second transition series where the last electron enters the 4D orbital, hence they are called as 4D series. You get the point, everybody? Yes, all right. Moving ahead, everyone. Now, the next one that we see is you have third transition series, and in the third transition series, obviously you have got it now. Yes, the last electron enters the 5d orbital, hence they are also called as 5d series. And the fourth transition element, the fourth transition series, this is called as the 6d series. Why so? Because the last electron enters the 6d orbital. Is this clear, everybody? Is this clear? Yes. All right. Okay. Now, let's take a look at, this is the position as I told you. Now, you need to remember the first 3D series very well. How do you remember it? Write it down if you want. This is a mnemonic that I have been using for a very long time and my students have liked it. So, I'm going to tell you. The mnemonic is Sachin Tendulkar, very crazy man. Free coaching, Nick's cousin. So, Sachin is scandium, Tendulkar is titanium, very is vanadium, crazy is chromium, man is a manganese, free is iron, coaching is cobalt, nick is a nickel, and cousin, CUZN. Remember it as like this. Okay, CUZN. So copper and zinc. All right. Yes, everybody. That's it. Okay. Now let's come to the electronic configuration. Now when we come to the electronic configuration, the general electronic configuration, everybody, is as you all can see. The general electronic configuration is n-1, d1 to 10, d orbitals. How do you draw the d orbitals? You draw the d orbitals like this: 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, right? Now in this you see that you can hold on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, 10 electrons. That is why you can see that it is n-1, d1 to 10 and ns 0 to 2. In the ns orbital, you can either have 0 electron, or you can have 1 electron, or you can have how many electron, or you can have 2 electrons, right? Yes, everybody. So this is the general electronic configuration. Have a look. This is the general electronic configuration. Do not forget it. This is very, very important. All right. Yes. Now, the n-1d orbital, this is also called as the penultimate shell. What do we call it? We call it as penultimate shell. Why do we call it penultimate shell? Because you have to understand that the last shell is actually 4s. The one that is just next to it, the one that is just inside the last shell, that is called as the penultimate shell. So the 3d and the 4s orbital that you have, their energy level, their energy difference is very, very small, and both of them can take part in a chemical reaction. That means the electrons that are present in 4s or 3d, both of them can take part in a reaction. Do you understand this? Yes, everybody. Alrighty. Okay. Now here is your electronic configuration. This is exactly same as your NCERT, everybody. So basically, if you take a look at it, look at scandium. Scandium will have 4s2, 3d1, right? Yes, or you can write it as 3d1, 4s2. For titanium, you're going to write it as 3d2, 4s2. For vanadium, you're going to write it as 3d3, 4s2, and it goes on, right? However, point to be noted, everybody, take a look. Chromium has a slightly exceptional electronic configuration. What does it have? It has 3d5, that means half filled. 3d is half filled here, and 4s has also one electron. That means it is completely, both 3d as well as 4s are your half filled. So what is your electronic configuration of chromium that you have to remember? This is important, everybody. This is important. It is chromium. Chromium has what? 3d5, 4s1. This is an exceptional electronic configuration. And if you carefully look at it, you will also find that copper also has a exceptional electronic configuration, where 3d has 10 electrons, but 4s has only 1 electron. So marking this as well. Okay, marking this as well. Now, here, let's come to the second, that is 4D transition series, where you have yttrium, zirconium, niobium, molybdenum, technetium, ruthenium, rhodium, palladium, gold, and cadmium. Correct? These are the elements here. Now, in this case, if you carefully look at it, majority of the elements have in the 5s, they have 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 electron, right? So, what are the exceptional one? Exceptional one. See, majority of the people on YouTube, they're going to teach you that the only exception here is a palladium, which I agree. It is an exceptional electronic configuration. However, if you notice, majority of them also have 5s may only 1 electron. So according to me, the exceptional ones are very less. So consider yttrium as exception, because 5s2, 4d1. Now consider zirconium, where you have 5s2, 4d2, and then consider cadmium, which has what? 5s2 and 4d10. Apart from this, you must remember palladium, which has 5 has 0, but 4D has a 10 electron. Now, some students are going to ask me, but ma'am, palladium also has fully filled electronic configuration. How come this is the transition series? Bache, once again, please pay attention to the transition series, to the transition elements definition. The definition said that in the most common oxidation state, in a simple oxidation state, or in its ground state, it must have partially filled d orbital. So, bache, if I take palladium to +2 oxidation state, don't you think that it will have 3d8, it will have 4d8 electronic configuration, and if it is 4d8 electronic configuration, that means that it is partially filled. If it is partially filled, that means that it is transition element. Do you understand this, everybody? Do you understand this? Great. Okay. Now let's come to the third transition series here. Here also look at it. Majority of them have 2 electrons in the 6s orbital. However, if you take a look at it, then you notice that platinum has only 1 electron in the 6s orbital. Then gold also has 1 electron in the 6s orbital. Yes. Alright, so these are the only 2 exceptions here. Next, coming to the fourth transition series, that is your 6D series. Herein, you just have to remember Rg. Rg has only 1 electron in the 7s. Otherwise, everybody else has 2 electrons in the 7s. All right, everybody? Yes. Now, coming to something that is called as exchange of energy, that many students have asked me already in the Telegram channel, as well as when I was taking a YouTube session. I've seen that students do find a little difficulty here in case of chromium and copper. So let's understand that why chromium and copper do have a stable electronic configuration even though it is half filled or fully filled. And this particular, this particular concept of them having half filled or fully filled but having a stable electronic configuration, it arises from something called as exchange energy. So let's understand this, everybody. So if you take a look at it, chromium, let's say that chromium has 3d5, right? Now, if it is 3d5, now this electron, it can get up and it can go to any of these orbitals. Is that right? It can get up and go to any of these orbitals. And while it is changing its position, do you understand that there will be some energy that is involved? Yes. If it wants to change its position, if it wants to go from one room to another room, it will need some energy. Is that correct? Yes, everybody. So, take a look at it. This one electron can go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 different places. This one electron, the second electron can go to 1, 2 and 3 different places. The third electron here can go to 2 different places, and the last electron can also take up one more space. So now 4, 3, 2, 1, if you add all of these, you will get a 10, which is a very good exchange energy that you will not find in the other electronic configuration. Now suppose in the case of, let's say that if chromium has instead of 3d5 and 4s1, if it had 3d4 4s2, then what would happen? Then it would be the exchange energy would be around 6, and that is why you get it that for 10 the exchange energy is higher, but for 3d4 exchange energy is lower, which means that this is a more stable, which means that this is more preferred than this, everybody. Do you understand this? This is called as the exchange energy of chromium, and same thing occurs with copper as well. All right, everybody? Okay, done. Now let's quickly come to physical properties, everyone. Now all of these D block elements, you know that majority of them are what? Actually, all of them are metals, right? Because they are metals, what happens to their physical properties? You will notice that their physical properties is basically typical metallic properties. They do have high tensile strength. Now what do you mean by tensile strength? Suppose I have this pencil. On this, if I put a lot of load, what will happen is that if it is a metal, it will not break down, rather it will bend a little bit. Yes, everybody. And that is your high tensile strength. So you have high tensile strength, and just like any other metal, they are ductile, they are malleable, they have high thermal and electrical conductivity, they have high metallic luster. However, exceptions are always there, and here the exceptions are, my dear students, exceptions are zinc, cadmium and mercury. Yes, what happens to zinc, cadmium and mercury? They are actually called as brittle metal, especially zinc. Zinc is called as a brittle metal. Zinc is not as hard, or it does not show the very typical properties of metal, So zinc is called as brittle metal. Do you get it? Yes. Now, if we talk about manganese, manganese also is a little exceptional, and that we will be able to understand from the enthalpy of atomization, from the number of electrons that are present in manganese. From there, we will be able to understand that why manganese also shows a little bit of deviation from the property. So they do have. Now the question that many students will ask, ma'am, if they have deviation from metallic properties, why are we still considering them as metals? Because you have to understand that, Baba, if even if one or two properties are not matching with the metallic properties, there are also many other properties that is followed, that is fulfilled by these elements, and that is why they're still considered to be as metals. Yes, understood everybody? Yes. So they have on or more typical one. This should have been one here. Okay, this should have been one here. So they have one or more typical metallic structures at normal temperature. Now, let's talk about the melting and the boiling points of transition metals. And the melting and the boiling points of the transition metals, obviously because they are metal, it is supposed to be high, and that is exactly what happens here. You will notice that they are very, very high. The high melting point of these metals are attributed to the involvement of greater number of electrons from n-1d in addition to the ns electron. So, bache, everybody try and understand this. Suppose, let's say that this is the metal, this is the, take a look at it. This is the positive sphere of the metal. Okay, this is at the center, and after this you will have electrons here, you will have electrons here, you will have electrons here, right? Now suppose that from the last shell it has lost electrons. Yes, from the last shell it has lost electron. Now the white part that is here, after losing the extra electron, the white part that is here, this is called as a kernel. Yes, this is called as kernel. The kernel becomes slightly unstable, and they are further okay to give away more electrons. You will notice that in some time. Okay, so we're continuing with physical properties, and like I've just told you that the melting point will rise to a maximum at D5. Now you will all be like, but ma'am, look at manganese. Manganese is right here. Manganese also has 3D5. True, absolutely true. But look at chromium. So tell me something. What is chromium's electronic configuration? 3D5 4s1. How many number of electrons? Chromium has a free that it can let go. 6 electrons. That does not happen here. Manganese has only 5 electrons that it can give away. But chromium here can give 6 electrons. Manganese also can give 7 electrons, of course, from 4s2. However, you see that as soon as from chromium you start traveling towards your right hand side in the periodic table, you will notice that manganese, there is a fall here. Why? Enthalpy of atomization can only explain this phenomena, everybody. Now, manganese has a stable electronic configuration, that we understand. Yes, so I am trying to explain it to you that why manganese and your technetium, why do these ones have exceptional melting points? So the concern that we have here, or the question that we have here, why do they have exceptional properties? The explanation is, my dear students, that manganese has a stable electronic configuration, which is why the 3D electrons, they are more tightly held by the nucleus. Yes, the nucleus can see the electrons and it is tightly holding on the electrons. So that means that all the electrons are not free to go. All the electrons are not readily available to go away from the nucleus. Understood? And that is why it reduces the delocalization of electrons, which results in weaker metallic bonding. Yes, do we understand this, everybody? Do we understand this, guys? Yes, I hope we understand this. Great. Okay. Moving ahead, now let's understand, we're still continuing. This is your enthalpy of atomization. So if you take a look at the graph, you will understand that majority of the transition elements, in general, the transition elements, they have high enthalpy of atomization. Just look at the word enthalpy of atomization. Enthalpy means what? Energy. Atomization means what? One atom. हमें चाहिए एक atom. What do we want? We want one atom. And to make from molecule to one atom, what is the energy that we will require? I have just now told you about the kernel. Yes, so these kernels, they are very active. I told you that also, right? These kernels are very active. They want to make more bonds. They want to make more bonds. And while they want to make more bonds, what will happen? These guys, they also have so many electrons. So the bonding will be very, very strong. You can't just break apart the bonding. Correct? Yes, everybody. So that means that you will require higher energy to break the bond. Only when you break the bond, you will get a single atom. Is that correct? Yes. So enthalpy of atomization, do you understand that it is high? And you again notice that enthalpy of atomization for manganese and technetium is again low. So what do we understand? The maxima, that means the maxima, look at this. This is called as the maxima. The peak is always reaching at about middle of each series. It indicates that one unpaired electron per d orbital. That means d orbital kitne hai? How many d orbitals are there? 5 d orbital. So per d orbital, if you have each unpaired electron, just like in the case of chromium, chromium has 5 unpaired electrons in the 3d and 1 unpaired electron in the 4s as well. And that, my dear students, it makes you reach the higher enthalpy of atomization. That means chromium can give away 6 electrons and form bonds with 6 electrons. And to break apart that bond, you will require a very, very high enthalpy, and that explains the enthalpy of atomization to be higher for a chromium here. You get to see that, everybody? Yes, do we all understand this? Amazing. Now, let us get into atomic radii. Atomic radii, my dear students, is ideally dictated by two factors. What are the two factors? The two factors here are, one is your nuclear charge, effective nuclear charge as we like to call it. Yes. And the second one is your shielding effect. Yes, the second one is called as your shielding effect. Now, we all know that if nuclear charge increases, what happens to atomic radius? It decreases. But if the shielding effect increases, then what happens to the atomic radius? It increases. So, in the very beginning, you notice that suddenly the atomic radius is decreasing. That means as the atomic number increases, what is happening? Atomic number increases, that means number of protons are also increasing. Do you understand? So if the number of protons here increases, that means effective nuclear charge is increasing, and I've just told you that effective nuclear charge, if it increases, atomic radius is decreasing. So here, as the atomic number increases, effective nuclear charge increases, atomic radius decreases. But right at this position, when you look at right at this position, you notice that the difference or the increment or the decrement, that means the atomic radius is not very much changing. It is pretty much consistent. Correct? Why? Because both of these factors, that is nuclear charge and shielding effect, both of them are working together here. Now what is happening here is that, yes, for sure, atomic radius to बढ़ रहा है. Atomic number is increasing. No problem with that. Atomic number is increases. But with the atomic number being increasing, what is happening here is the electrons that are increasing. Number of electrons are also increasing. Atomic number अगर बढ़ रहा है, तो number of protons increasing, number of protons increasing, number of electrons are also increasing. Correct? Yes. So if atomic number is increasing, number of protons are increasing, number of electrons entering the d orbital, that is also increasing. Now, when you have so many d electrons present in the d orbital, you know that these guys have very poor shielding effect. Right? So now what is happening is that the shielding effect as well as the nuclear charge, both are somehow increasing, and that compensates for the atomic radius to not increase. Now again, if you pay attention, you notice that from nickel to copper to zinc, especially from this part, if you see from copper to zinc, there is a quick jump for the atomic radius. Is that true? Yes. Why is there a quick jump? Because now you have added 10 electrons in the zinc, and that means there is an inter-electronic repulsion that has been created, which is why suddenly there is a jump in the atomic radius. I have written everything here. If you want, you can go through it. You see, I'm not just reading the slides, I'm trying to explain whatever is not written here. What is written here, you go through that. Okay. All right, everybody, atomic radii, you have understood. So, the atomic radii, it increases down the group. That means the atomic radii of second series are larger than those of first transition series. But atomic radii of the second and the third transition series are almost the same. Why? Because of, why? Why is it similar? Because of lanthanoid contraction, and that we will be learning when we take a look at F block elements in some time. You get it? Why lanthanoid contraction? Cool, everybody? All right. Now let's come to ionization enthalpies, and when we come across ionization enthalpy, we understand that what is happening is that, see, when you go from left to right, atomic radius for sure is slightly decreasing, correct? Yes. And what is happening is the Z effective, the nuclear charge, the effective nuclear charge is also increasing. So that means what will happen? Ionization energy gradually will increase. Generally, that is the case. However, in case of the d block elements, you don't see that there is a regular trend in ionization enthalpy. Very ulta pulta trend you will see. Okay, very irregular trend you will see. Why so? Because we have seen that atomic radius was also not increasing or decreasing as such. Did you see that? We have just seen that yes, initially it was decreasing, then it remained constant, and then there was a quick jump here. Yes. So does that make sense for you that somehow the ionization enthalpy will also change because it is slightly dependent on the atomic radius as well? Absolutely. So lo and behold, you get it that why ionization enthalpy is an irregular trend. Do you understand, everybody? Yes. And while the atomic radius is decreasing, you understand that the nucleus is able to absorb the electron, the last electrons. So it becomes very difficult for you to take away the electron and run away. Get it? Okay. All right. Okay. Now, if you want to take a look at the ionization enthalpy, you can for sure take a look at it. Look at this ionization energy. One is 631, then 656. Then see it is again reduced. 650, 653, 717, 762, 750. See, again reduced, right? And then again for zinc, do you see that ionization enthalpy has increased to 906? Why? Atomic radius. Why? Atomic radius. Also, what is happening? Or fully filled d orbital. Fully filled d orbital. That means the s electrons are also poor shielding effect of d orbital, right? Ab ye samjho. Look at this. This is the nucleus. You have fully filled d orbital. Now, all these electrons that are there, you also know that the d orbitals are very poor shielders, right? Poor shielders. So that means the s orbital electrons, they are seen by the nucleus. So the nucleus is going to hold it. The nucleus is like, no, I'm not allowing you to go away from my force of attraction. Get the point? Yes. So this is what is happening here. Okay. Alright, now what happens is the highest value of third ionization enthalpies. You notice that in case of copper, nickel and zinc, okay, look at this. For copper, third ionization enthalpy is 3556. For zinc, it is 3837. For nickel, it is 3402. These are very high numbers. Do you notice? These are very high numbers. So that means that if you want to take away the third electron from zinc or copper or from nickel, it will be very high. It will be very tough because they have very high energy, right? It will be very, very tough. And because it will be very tough, that also explains that why copper and nickel and zinc, you will not find them in the +3 oxidation state. You will majorly find them in the +2 oxidation state. They don't like to show you the +3 oxidation state. Gotcha? Clear? All right? Yes. Of course, the first ionization enthalpies of the 5D elements, it is going to be very, very high as compared to, it is going to be very, very high when you compare it to those of 3D and 4D elements. Why? Because just before the 5D elements, you have also introduced the 4f orbitals, and the f orbitals are even more worse shielders. Yes. So that means that the nucleus is clearly able to see the last electrons and it is going to hold it together. It will not allow the electrons to go away. Do you guys understand this? Yes, everybody. All right. Now let's come to the oxidation state. Yes, we all know that they do show variable oxidation state because the n-1d and the ns orbital in the atoms of the d block elements, they have very similar energies. And because of their very similar energies, what happens? The electrons can be removed from the penultimate shell. That is the one that is just inside the ns electron. Yes, 4s and 3d electrons, right? So both 4s and 3d, they can participate in the bond formation. They can participate, they can give away their electrons. Now, in d block elements, the kernel is unstable. See, I told you the kernel is unstable. Therefore, it can lose one or more electrons from the n-1d electrons. And across the period, oxidation state increases and it's maximum at the center, and then it decreases even if the atomic number increases. You get the point, everybody? Yes or no? All right. Now, the transition metals, they also sometimes show you zero oxidation state, especially if you have seen the metal carbonyls like nickel with carbonyl, NiCO4 in the coordination compounds chapter. We study about that, and it has nickel is in zero oxidation state, right? Okay, now the bonding in the compounds of higher oxidation state, you will notice that if they are in the +2 and +3, then it will mostly be ionic, and if it goes to higher oxidation state, it will be covalent. Once again, let us just quickly recap the Fayon's rule. Everybody, in Fayon's rule, what have we studied? We have studied that small cation, large anion will give rise to what? Covalent character. So if anything goes to higher oxidation state, that means it has lost plenty of electrons. If it has lost plenty of electrons, Baba, what will happen to the atomic radius? It will be chota only, na? Atomic radius will become smaller, isn't it? And if atomic radius is smaller, that means what will happen? You get small cation, and if you mix them with a large anion, you will have covalent character. But if you look at the +2 and +3 oxidation state, only after losing 2 or 3 electrons, it will still be of a bigger size. That means we have large cation, small anion, and that will give rise to ionic character. Gotcha. Is this clear? Amazing. Now, one major thing that has come up a lot of times, even in your JEE, in your NEET, in your board examination, everybody. So let me tell you that. What is it? The thing is that copper 2 plus is more stable than copper plus, even when copper plus is 3D10, whereas copper 2 plus, yes, copper 2 plus, as you know what, copper 2 plus is 3D9 here. Why? Because of high heat of hydration. Let's understand this, okay? We will understand this, why this is happening. Also, apart from that, one more thing that I wanted to tell you, that copper plus, if you see, right, copper plus, this is an intermediate oxidation state. What is this? This is an intermediate oxidation state, correct? So if you put this in aqueous solution, then what will happen? It has a tendency to go to the +2 oxidation state, which is highest. Apart from that, it can also come out to 0 oxidation state. That means it can disproportionate. What happens here? Disproportionation happens here. Disproportionation happens here, which is why it is further unstable. Get the point, everybody? Yes, guys, this is clear. All right. Now we come across something called as standard electrode potential. This, my dear students, this is a very, very, very important concept. So please pay attention here, because from here many questions do come, and if you are not done with this, you will face some problems. Okay? What will you do? You will face some problems. So let me explain this, what really happens here. So suppose you have a metal. Yes, the metal is in solid state. Now you have to take this metal in aqueous state, and you have taken away one electron, only then it can be in aqueous state. Correct? Yes. Now the way you are seeing, right, with one arrow, the reaction or whatever is happening here, it's not as simple as that. There are a couple of things that happen here. So understand what is happening here. Initially, from this solid state, you will definitely have to take it in a gaseous state. Do you understand this? Yes. At this point, what energy do you have to give it? You have to give it sublimation energy to convert it to gaseous state. Correct. Okay. Now from here, you have to take away one electron, isn't it? You have to take away one electron in its gaseous state, isolated atom. That means what do you have to give? You have to give delta ionization energy 1. Is that true, everybody? And please understand this, okay? Sublimation energy you have to give, ionization energy you have to give, but the moment you put this in water, hydration energy is released. There are three things happening, three processes that are happening. Sublimation, ionization. This two, you are going to give it to the atom. You are going to give it to the atom. This, the third, not the wrong finger, guys. This is my ring finger. This is not the wrong finger. So this particular, that is the hydration energy, this is released. This is released. So everybody, now come back to the thermodynamics, everyone. When you are giving it to the system, you are giving it to the system. Work is done on the system. Plus is happening. Yes. Plus energy, great. Hydration energy is released by the system. That means negative is happening. So plus and minus, when you get all of this together, for all the other elements, it is somehow compensated. But in case of copper, the hydration energy that is released is so high that the negative happens, and you will see that the standard electrode potential, it is a negative value for copper. Get the point? Yes, everybody. I know. Some of the students will be like, ma'am, please teach thermodynamics. Coming up, bacha, coming up. You know that I have to do everything, and it takes a lot of time to make this slides, you know. I have to make it concise. I have to make it tight. I have to make sure that the script is tight. I'm not, digressing to many other things that I like to talk in the class. And that is why, it's all recorded and concept crisp. That's what we are naming them. All right. Now take a look at the trends, everybody. So you notice that this is not a regular trend also. Why? Because hey, ionization energy was not regular trend. Do you remember? Sublimation energy here is also not a regular trend. And similarly, hydration enthalpy is also not a regular trend for the D block elements. And therefore, because all these three processes or all these three energies are not regular, but if you add all the three of them, that will also not be regular. Hai na? And that is why you notice that it is not a regular trend. Okay, now the general trend towards less negative E naught values along the series is due to the general increase in the sum of first and second ionization enthalpies. And I have just told you about copper. See, copper shows a unique behavior in the series as it is the only metal that has a positive value for E naught. Acha, I said negative value, sorry, positive value. Yes, what is happening? Again, remember, plus and plus, right? So you have given plus positive charge, you have given positive, you have given positive energy, but this is going to be negative. So when this is released, both of these are, all the three of them are not compensated enough properly, and that is why it shows a positive value. One second, I am a little confused. Is it a positive value? What is written in your NCRT, bache? Is it a positive value or is it a negative value? Copper has positive value, yes, 0.34. 0.34, yes, copper has positive value. So this explains that why it does not liberate H2 gas. Now copper, if you remember, copper, if you mix it with hydrochloric acid gas, copper will not be able to release hydrogen gas. Yes, it cannot. Only with oxidizing acids such as sulfuric acid or nitric acid, it will be able to release, because look at sulfuric acid and look at the sulfur. Sulfur here is in +6 oxidation state, which is the highest oxidation state for sulfur. So sulfur can only reduce itself. While sulfur is reducing itself, what will it do? It will oxidize the person who is who is standing right in front of it. Correct? Yes. बच्चा समझ पा रहे हो ना क्या मैं कह रही हूँ? देखो, if I reduce myself, definitely if I reduce myself, I can only, what am I doing? Reducing myself. That means what am I doing? I am taking my highest oxidation state lower. So from +6, sulfur will try to come to +4. What is it doing? It is gaining 2 electrons. How will it gain 2 electrons? अरे बाबा, सामने वाला बंदा, that also has to give 2 electrons ना. Only then it will be able to gain 2 electrons. Correct? See, if I don't have money today and if I ask somebody, let's say that I ask money from you, like please give me 200 rupees, give me 200 rupees. Now I want the money, right? I have accepted the money. How have I accepted it? Only because you were able to give it to me. Only because you gave me the 200 rupees, I could accept it. So similarly, here also, in the case of sulfuric acid, because sulfur is in highest oxidation state, it can only reduce itself. While reducing itself, it oxidizes the other person. So copper is made to lose electrons, and that is the only time when it can release hydrogen gas. Gotcha. Is this clear? Amazing. Now, if you notice the values of E naught for manganese, nickel and zinc, it is more negative than expected. Yes. Why so? It is because of the greater stability of d orbitals. Bacha. D orbitals in the case of manganese is what, half filled. In the case of nickel or in the case of zinc is also completely filled, you notice, right? Yes. So that is why what happens is they have D5 in Mn2 plus completely filled in, completely filled in zinc. So they have greater stability, and that is why they have more negative E naught values. Understood? Okay. Now we're going to understand M3 plus to M2 plus. That means 3 electrons. After giving away 3 electrons, if you want to convert it to M2 plus, then what will happen? So you will notice that there is a very low value for E naught Sc3 plus to Sc2 plus. That means that Sc2 plus is not so stable. Sc3 plus is very stable. Look at the electronic configuration of scandium. What is it? 3d1, 4s2. So 3 electrons, if it gives away, it will get converted to a noble gas configuration, and that is a very good thing for it. Okay. Now the highest value for zinc is on an account of very high stability of Zn2 plus. Zinc, after giving away 2 electron, it will come to 3d10. Now 3d10 is fully filled. Chahega kya wo? After having a fully filled stability, do you think that it would want to give away more electrons? Not at all, not possible. So that is why it is very, very stable. Comparatively high value for E naught, Mn3 plus to Mn2 for manganese. If you look at manganese, manganese does not want to give away 3 electrons, because after giving away 2 electrons, now it has a half-filled stability 3d5. Very nice, very good. It is happy there. So 3d5 is a stable electronic configuration, which is why it does not want to let go of the third electron. But ulta of it happens in the case of Fe. Iron, after giving away 3 electrons, it is very stable. Now it has achieved 3d5. So iron, after giving away 3 electrons, it is very stable, very happy and everything. But after giving away 2 electrons, it is like, oh, I have 3d6. Not liking this. One more electron if I give away, I will attain the half-filled stability. So that is what iron does. Understood, everybody? Got it? Okay. Now the question is that, ma'am, why did we study this E naught values? Why did we have to, irritate our mind with the E naught values? Because, bacha, from the E naught value, you get to understand the chemical reactivity. So let's understand this. Now the metals of the first transition series, that is except copper, they are relatively more reactive than the other. Yes. Why? Because they are oxidized by H plus ions. Yes. Even though the actual rate is very, very slow, especially if you take a look at titanium and vanadium, they're very passive because they get a dilute non-oxidized, they're very passive towards dilute non-oxidizing acids at room temperature. All right, yes, everybody, do you get this? Do you get this? Understood this, everyone? Yes or no? Yes or no? Tell me, quickly, tell me. Quickly tell me, everybody. Yes or no? Okay. All right. Chalo, आगे बढ़ते हुए. Moving ahead. Now take a look at E naught values for the redox couple of M3 plus to M2 plus. That indicates for manganese and cobalt 3 plus ions, they are the strongest oxidizing agents. Why? Manganese would love to get converted to Mn2 plus. Same with cobalt. Cobalt also would love to get into the CO2 plus state, not a 3 plus state. Whereas now, if you take a look at titanium 2 plus, vanadium 2 plus and chromium 2 plus, they are the strongest reducing agent. Why? Because chromium does not like to be in the what? It does not like to be in the Cr2 plus. It is a strong reducing agent. That means what will it do? It will lose another electron. Now, the question that may come is that, ma'am, why chromium 2 plus, Cr in plus 2, why is it a strong reducing agent? If it has lost 2 electrons, then that means that it is a 3d4. See, chromium, if it has lost 2 electrons, it will be 3d4, correct? But chromium, if it is in plus 3, that means it is going to be 3d3. Ma'am, 3d3 too is not half filled also. How come 3d3 is more stable? Ah, look at this now. Now 3d3, everybody, how is the splitting going to happen? You understand that it is going to be T2G. So 1, 2, 3 and you will have EG. EG is empty. 3D, look at this. T2G is fully filled and that's why the stability is achieved. Get the point? That's why the stability is achieved and that is why it can liberate hydrogen from dilute acid. You get the point, everybody? Yes or no? Okay. Now let us come to the catalytic properties. So they are known for their catalytic properties. I think everybody knows that, right? I think everybody knows that. Why? Now there are two reasons why they show this catalytic property. Number one is that they have a variable oxidation state. What do I write? They have, one second, let me make my handwriting a little better. Let me make my handwriting a little better. What can I write? I can write that they have variable oxidation state. This is the number one reason. And the second reason is that they also have large surface area, okay, large surface area for the reactant to be absorbed, correct, large surface area. So let me give you some examples. Yes, you must have heard about V2O5, vanadium pentoxide. Where is vanadium pentoxide used? It is used in the process of a contact process. Yes, and now in the case of contact process, what do? You take sulfur dioxide and try and convert it to SO3. Is that right, everyone? Absolutely. Next is, everyone, TiCl3 plus Al2 it will be, but no, don't write Al2. You can directly write AlC2H5 and this is used as a Ziegler-Natta catalyst. Okay, what is this used as? This is used as Ziegler-Natta catalyst. And where is this used? This is used in the polymerization of ethylene. When you had the chapter polymer, that time you used to talk about Ziegler-Natta catalyst, but now you don't have to. It's fine. Okay. Next, everybody is let's say copper. Copper is used for oxidation of alcohol. Oxidation of alcohol. Yes. Next, everybody, another example that I can give you is palladium. Palladium is used for hydrogenation of alkene. Hydrogenation of alkene or alkyne to convert them to either alkene or alkane. Correct, everybody? Yes. So these are some of the examples of catalytic property. Now let's come to magnetic behavior. Magnetic behavior, everybody, I think we all know that for the magnetic behavior, how is mu calculated? Mu is calculated as n multiplied with n plus 2 root over Bohr magneton. This is the formula that you use, but you should always remember that the number of unpaired electrons and the Bohr magneton, that is mu, magnetic moment, they're very closely related. It is either 0.75 to 0.9 difference. There is a difference of 0.75 to 0.9. Okay. All right. So that is what you see. Now here are all the values that you can check later if you want. Just take a look at it. Now, next property of the D block elements is that they can form complexes. What can they form? They can form complexes. So the transition metal ions, they form large number of complex compounds, and about that we will be studying in the next chapter, that is coordination compound, which is also going to come very, very soon. Okay. All right, next is formation of colored compounds. So, bache, this particular chart you must remember it, very necessary, because from here questions have come even in the 2024-2025 JEE mains examination. Now, let me tell you what are the ones that you have to remember. They have asked you about this blue pink. They have asked you about this blue, they have asked you, and they have asked you about this as well. Okay, so these are the ones that they have asked in 2025. Next, what can come is probably violet or pink. Pink may come. Pink is because pink is very different, so they can ask you about a pink. Okay. All right, everybody. So just study this very well. Just know this chart very, very well. It's important. They can also form interstitial compounds. Interstitial compounds bole to, those type of compounds where the smaller atoms like hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, they get into the voids. What do? They occupy the voids. Khali khali jagah hota hai na? Yes. Suppose if I have, let's say that, okay, let me try and make this. So suppose this is an atom, there is another atom here, there is another atom here, there is another atom here. One atom is here, one atom is here, one atom is here, one atom is here, right? Now you notice that these are the empty spaces. Yes, this yellow color shaded part that you see, these are the empty spaces. Now in this empty space, if I have another atom, let's say carbon, nitrogen or hydrogen, if they enter, then it will not follow stoichiometric coefficients and it will be non-stoichiometric compounds. So examples are everybody write this down. You have titanium hydride. Yes, this is an example. You have TiH2, this is also an example. All right, then you have Fe3C, which is a carbide. So these are some of the examples of your interstitial compounds. Now what happens in interstitial compounds? They still have their electrical conductivity, because at the end of the day they're still metals, right? They are inert in nature, they don't react so much, and what happens is they're even harder than the pure metals as well. They have very, very high melting points when you compare them with the metals. Okay, one more property of the D block elements is that they form alloys. Why? Because their sizes are very close to each other, right? Their sizes are very close to each other, their properties are quite similar to each other, atomic radii and the other characteristics, because they're very similar to each other, they can easily form alloys. One of the major example of alloys, everybody knows, brass and bronze, isn't it? Brass and bronze, these are both prepared with copper with some other elements, and they are very, very popular alloys. Correct, everybody? Gotcha. All right, let's come to important compounds of transition elements. We are reaching the most important part of the chapter, that is potassium dichromate and potassium permanganate. I believe that I will be able to finish the chapter in the next 10 minutes, next 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. All right. So the metals of the first transition series, they form oxides with oxygen and at a very high temperature. That is something that you know. Very simple and easy explanation line. I don't think I have to explain anything here. Now, the oxidation state that they can occupy is, or they can acquire, that means after losing electrons, it is +1 to +7. You all know that manganese can go up to +7 oxidation state. Is that right? Yes, absolutely. The highest oxidation state in the oxides of any transition metal, it is always equal to the group number. But only till manganese. After manganese, you don't see that they follow the group number. That is iron. You will not see that iron also goes up to 6th periodic. Iron does not go up to, wait. Group 3 is scandium. So 3, 4, 5, 6. Sachin Tendulkar, very crazy man, free. Iron belongs to group 8, right? Now in group 8, you will not see that iron also goes to +8 oxidation state. That does not happen. But manganese, it belongs to group 7 and it can show you a +7 oxidation state. So only till manganese you get to see this. After that, you don't see it, okay? Alright. However, scandium also is slightly different. Scandium can show you +3 oxidation state only. It does not show you +2 or +1. Cool. Alright, everybody. Yes. Also, one more thing is that in the lower oxidation state, they have ionic character. And as they go to the higher oxidation state, their ionic character decreases. For example, if you look at Mn2O7, Mn2O7 is a green color covalent compound. Okay? Now let us come to the nature of oxides. So, bache, I think this is something that I have always explained it to you. I have always explained it to you in exactly the same manner. I am again going to explain this to you. So, if you take a look at it, +1, +2 and +3 oxidation state, these are what? These are basic in nature. What are they? They are basic in nature. Yes, usually you will find that +4 and +5 to some extent they will be amphoteric in nature. And if you go even above, that is +6 and +7, yes, sometimes even +5, they will be acidic in nature. So we say that as the oxidation state increases, they become more acidic in nature. And that is exactly the same thing that you will find for manganese. You will find the same thing for vanadium. You will find it for chromium as well. Do you understand this, everybody? Yes, guys, is this clear? I hope perhaps it is clear. Now let us come to potassium dichromate, that is our K2Cr2O7, and what are we going to do? We are going to prepare it from chromite ore. Yes, from chromite ore. So in the preparation process, the first thing that you do, it's very simple actually. You don't have to be scared about it. Yes, first thing that you do is you prepare it from sodium chromate. What did I tell you? I have just told you that it is prepared from chromite ore. That means you need something that has chromium. So what are we going to do? We are going to have sodium chromate. Okay. So firstly, we are going to take FeCr2O4. All right. With that, we are going to take some sodium carbonate, Na2CO3. And we are going to add some amount of oxygen as well. When we do this, please pay attention here, everyone. What have you taken? You have taken FeCr2O4. What is this? This is your chromite ore. This is your chromite ore. Now, this chromite ore, when it has reacted with sodium carbonate, what will happen, bacha? What are you expecting? Do you all expect that here you are going to have Na2Cr O4? What is this? This is sodium chromate. What have you formed? Sodium chromate, but you don't want chromate. In the heading, what have I written? Potassium dichromate. You want dichromate, bache. So you will have Na2Cr4 plus there will be some amount of Fe2O3. Yes, and there will be of course some amount of carbon dioxide. I haven't balanced it yet. Whatever I have remembered, I have written those stoichiometric coefficient. You can go and check it out and you can definitely do this later. Okay. Now in the second step, the chromate that I have, from the chromate I have to make it into dichromate. Is that something that I am expecting to do? Yes. So now what am I going to do is, let's take the chromate. Na2Cr4. I have taken the chromate. Now with this, if I add sulfuric acid, you understand that what will happen? What will sulfuric acid do? Sulfuric acid is not doing anything. It is just giving it a acidic environment. Now in the acidic environment, it is going to turn into NaCr2O7. Na2Cr2O7. Yes. Na2Cr2O7. Lo and behold, we have our chromite. We have our dichromite now. But What do we have? We have sodium dichromate. We don't want sodium dichromate. We want potassium dichromate. Correct. Now it is absolutely easy peasy. Okay. So you have, this is what sodium dichromate. What have you got? You have got sodium dichromate. है ना? Sodium dichromate. With this, you will obviously get, because you have Na2 and SO4, so you will be getting Na2SO4 as well, sodium sulfate plus some amount of water, definitely. Yes, this is what will come. Now from sodium chromate, sodium dichromate, all you have to do is you just have to add now potassium and remove the sodium from here. So this is going to be the simplest task for you. All you have to take is, you are going to take this Na2Cr2O7. Once you take this and just add KCl, what will happen? You will get K2Cr2O7. Cl will go and hang out with the Na, so it will become NaCl, and that's it. This is your preparation. Please tell me that now it is not looking like it is too very difficult anymore. Yes, I really hope that it is not looking very difficult. I'm going to delete this page because we don't need it. Now, what is it that you have to remember? You have to also remember the structures of chromate and dichromate, and you get to see that both of them are tetrahedral. Just that in the dichromate, you have two tetrahedral that are joined together. Correct, everybody? So both of them are tetrahedral. Both are tetrahedral. Do remember this, okay? Both are tetrahedral. Cool. All right, everybody. Okay, done. Now what are we going to learn is, we're going to learn the properties of potassium dichromate. So let's do that, everybody. Some properties of potassium dichromate. See, there are, properties like color and the melting point, and are they soluble, not soluble. These all you can study. I don't think I have to, take up some time to even explain the color and the properties. You all know that why color happens. DD transition, correct? Okay. So directly we will come to action of heat. Now, when it comes to action of heat, what will happen is that if you take potassium dichromate, that is K2Cr2O7, and what are we going to do? Action of heat. That means that you are only going to heat this. When you heat this, what do you expect? Decomposition. It will break down. Absolutely. What will it break down? It will break down into, it is going to form K2CrO4. Yes, and with that you will also get Cr2O3 and some amount of oxygen as well. So this is the action of heat that you will get. Okay. Alright, now let's come to action of alkalis. Alkalis bole to bases, correct? Okay. So number one thing is that if you take potassium dichromate, that is K2Cr2O7, and with that if you make it react with potassium hydroxide, what do you think? What are you expecting it to happen? What are you expecting it to happen? You will get potassium chromate from here. Truly, you will get potassium chromate. So K2Cr2O7, when it reacts with an alkali, what will you get? You will get K2CrO4. K2CrO4, and with that what will you get? Some amount of H2O. So basically action of alkalis, potassium dichromate gets converted to potassium chromate. Yes. However, please have a look at it. Please pay attention, everybody. Now, if you acidify it, okay. Now, if you acidify it, so please take a look at it. Yes. So this was what? This was your dichromate, and this is your chromate. Now it has converted to yellow. Okay, yellow. What have I done? KOH. Now let's acidify it. Okay. Now let's acidify it. So what are we taking? We are taking our K2CrO4. That is, we are taking the potassium chromate. Now chromate, if I add acid environment, that is sulfuric acid, you know what will happen? It will again get converted to K2Cr2O7. That means that chromate to dichromate, dichromate to chromate, chromate to dichromate, dichromate to chromate. This is also pH activated. So you change the pH. These guys, they are going to change and show their colors. Yes, they are going to change and show their colors. Cool hai everybody? Yes. Now let's take a look at action of concentrated sulfuric acid. Yes, what will it form? Let's take a look at it. Yes, so we are going to take, of course, K2Cr2O7, and with this I am adding H2SO4. Acidic environment, what do you expect it to happen? It will go and form CrO3. With that, it is also going to form KHSO4, and probably there will be some H2O. That means this is what? This is anhydride. What is it forming? It is forming chromic anhydride. What does it form? It forms anhydride. Okay. Yes, chromic anhydride it forms. What are we adding? Concentrated sulfuric acid. Gotcha? Alright. Oxidizing property, we know that Cr is already in +6 oxidation state. It cannot oxidize itself further. So it can only oxidize the other person, other chemicals that are present in front of them, other elements or whatever, compound, whatever. It is only going to oxidize the other person. Cool, everybody? Now, the most important part, everybody, the most important part of potassium dichromate. Acha, so here you have this properties of potassium dichromate. All right, now I am going to add a page here and write down all the important equations of potassium dichromate. So please have a look at them and please make sure that you know each one of them, because they are very important, everybody. So number one, okay, number one is, what are you doing? What are you going to take? You are going to take K2Cr2O7. This when it reacts with, okay, this when it reacts with Ki, let's say, okay, Ki. So it is going to be I minus. Do you understand this? Yes, we have Ki. And now I'm going to leave a little bit space because I also have to add, remember, H plus ions and everything. So take a look at it. Now it is going to form what? Ki, right? It is definitely going to form I2 here. Okay? It is definitely going to form I2 here. Now you see there are 7 oxygen, right? 7 oxygen. So can I add here 7H2O? The moment I have added 7H2O, 7 2s are 14. That means this side I will need 14H plus. Okay. I2. So here I have to add 2Ki. Is that clear, everybody? Yes or no? Yes. Now the moment I add 2Ki, 2Ki, already have 2K here. It is not going to be balanced like this. You know what I have to add here is, I will have to add here 6Ki. If I add here 6Ki, then I'm going to get 3I2. 3I2. This is your K2Cr2O7. We don't have to balance this. I think this is enough. Okay. This is enough, everybody. Please take a look at it. Please take a look at it. The other ones you can balance later. Okay. You just have to balance this much. This is fine. Next, everybody. So I minus gets converted to I2, everybody. Now let's take a look at H2S2 sulfur. H2S2 sulfur. So what will happen? You have H2S plus you are going to take Cr2O7 2 minus. Let me write, because K2, right? Yes, I can do this. Now from here, H2S is going to get converted to what? It is going to get converted to sulfur. So sulfur. How many sulfur can I get? How many sulfur can I get? What do you think? H2S2 sulfur. How many sulfur? I'm going to get here 3 sulfur. So I can write here 3 sulfur. That means that 3H2S. I have 7 here. So 7H2O. The moment I write 7H2O, so 7 2s are 14 hydrogen. But here I have 3 2s are 6 hydrogen already. 14 minus 6 will be how much? 14 minus 6 will be? 14 minus 6 will be 8. So here I will have 8 H plus ions. Okay. So this is how you can write it. And next, everybody, what do you have? Next, you have oxalate. Oxalate was here? No. Sulfites to sulfates and thiosulfates. That is also there. Yes. Sulfites to, or nitrate. Let's do nitrate first. Okay. Let's do nitrate first. So you have NO2 minus. NO2 minus plus Cr2O7 2 minus. If you take, then what will happen? NO2 minus is going to get converted to NO3. NO3, and here obviously you have to write 7H2O. The moment you write 7H2O, 7 to the 14, here you will have 14H plus. Yes, NO2 2, it will go to NO3. That's it. That's it. Done. Okay. All right. Next, what else is there? What else is there, guys? SO2 to sulfuric acid. Yes, SO2. Let's take SO2 plus Cr2O7 2 minus, and this is going to form sulfuric acid. So SO4 2 minus, SO4 2 minus plus 7H2O. 7H2O can I write? Instead of writing 7H2O, we also know that there will be H2SO2, H2SO4. Let's say if I take 3SO2, then how many am I going to get? 3SO2, because here it will be K2. So I will have K2SO4. Okay, now let me remove this minus. K2SO4 plus I can also have Cr2SO4 3, and plus you will have 3H2. I think sort of like this will be the equation. Not sure, please check it out. Not sure, please check it out. You can balance it also, right? You can balance it also. Okay. Then comes your stannous to stannic salts. Stannous is going to be what? Sn2 plus. Sn2 plus goes and gets converted to Sn plus 4. So here definitely you are taking Cr2O7 2 minus, and then you can balance it as usual. You are going to have 7H2 on this side. That means 14H plus here. Okay. All right. Sixth position, everybody. Sixth one is going to be what? Sixth one. What else? So basically similarly, I mean, you understand that now. Yeah. You understand this? What is happening here? Yes. Do you understand this, everybody? Ferrous to ferric. Ferrous to ferric also happens. Okay. So suppose you have FeSO4. FeSO4, let's say. Okay. FeSO4 if I take, and if I take here Cr2O7 2 minus, you know what is it is going to get converted? It is going to form Fe2SO4 whole thrice. And of course, here this side, you can balance it later. Okay. So basically, this is sort of the equation that does these are the equations that may definitely come in your exam. So please take a look at it. Now, next thing that is very, very important, that will definitely 110% it has come at most of the, just open the PYQ and you will find chromine chloride test and the reaction with hydrogen peroxide where chromium gets this butterfly, structure. These two are very, very important. So for chromine chloride test, what happens is, you take your K2Cr2O7, that is potassium dichromate. With that, you are also going to take potassium chloride. And with that, if you take some amount of sulfuric acid, then you know what you get. You get chromyl chloride, which is CrO2Cl2. Okay, CrO2Cl2 plus K2Cr2O7 KCl here, and H2SO4. So it will become KHSO4 and there will be some amount of water. So this is your chromyl chloride and this is very, very, very important. Okay. All right. Now next come to hydrogen peroxide. So in case of hydrogen peroxide, what do you have? You have Cr2O7 2 minus. Yes, this is going to react with H2O2 plus some amount of H plus ions will also be there. That means that it is going to form CrO5 plus. What will you get? 5H2O. And this CrO5, how do you draw the structure? It is like this: oxygen, oxygen. This is called as the butterfly structure of CrO5. Okay, very important. Next, everybody, let us come across potassium permanganate. This is also equally important. Both of these are the most important part of your DNF block. Okay, this is what exactly you have to study. Now, in the case of potassium permanganate, what do? You prepare it from a mineral called as pyrolusite ore. So remember it, potassium dichromate is prepared from chromite ore. Permanganate is prepared from pyrolusite ore. Okay, what do? Pyrolusite ore. So initially what do is you have to take MnO4 2 minus. Okay, MnO4 2 minus plus 4H plus. If you take, then you are going to get MnO4 minus, which is your permanganate, plus you will also get MnO2 and you will get some amount of water. So this is how you can prepare the potassium permanganate. In fact, to be very honest, this is the preparation of potassium permanganate. Okay, yes, everybody, basically what happens is here, large scale. Yes, on the large scale, how is it prepared? And let me tell you, one second, sorry. Let me tell you how to prepare it on the large scale. Sorry, one second, everybody. It is prepared from the mineral pyrolusite ore. So what are we going to do? We are going to take the mineral pyrolusite ore. Pyrolusite is MnO2. Okay. All right. Now MnO2, if you add some amount of KOH and oxidation and oxygen also, that means alkaline oxidative. That's what you are doing. And here, what will you get? You will get K2MnO4. All right. Yes, everybody. And from here, you will also be getting H2O. Cool, everyone. Yes. So this is the industrial preparation. That means large scale preparation is like this. Okay. Large scale preparation is like this. Okay. All right. Apart from this, I don't think that preparation of potassium permanganate is asked so much. Preparation of potassium permanganate isn't asked so much. So let me delete this slide as well. What is asked is structure, you must know. Yes. So you notice that MnO4 2 minus. Guys, please understand and please notice this. MnO4 2 minus. When we say MnO4 2 minus, that means that we are talking about K2MnO4. Yes. And when we are talking about MnO4 minus, that means that we are talking about KMNO4. Alright. So both of them are again tetrahedral. However, MnO4, KMNO4 minus, this is diamagnetic, whereas MnO4 2 minus, yes, that is not diamagnetic. That means it is paramagnetic. Cool hai? Chalo, similar to potassium dichromate, we also again have to take a look at action of heat. So let's find out what happens. What do you think? Of course, this will also go for thermal decomposition. So if you take your KMNO4, yes, KMNO4, and if you heat it, then what are you going to get? You are going to get potassium manganate, that is K2MnO4, plus you are going to get MnO2 and you are going to get O2. So that means if you heat it, you get all the things from which it is made of. Okay, from which it is made up of. All right, am I taking more time? Wow, it has become 110. Sorry guys, we're going to try and make it concise. Okay. All right. Oxidizing property. We again know that it is a powerful oxidizing agent. So we don't really have to talk much about this. All right. Now let us quickly get to potassium permanganate in acidic medium. And for this, I actually gave you a trick, everybody. I did give you a trick about potassium permanganate. So please go ahead and watch that shorts. I've made a YouTube shorts, everyone. Let me show you. This is my own channel. This is my own channel, everyone. So yeah, I have been watching a lot of Shark Tank, I guess, as you all know. Okay. Now you can see all my search list also. 1 second. Let me show you this. All right, guys, found it. Here is my channel, and if you just go to the shorts tab here, you will find that this is the trick that I have told you. In 30 seconds, you will be able to solve each and every potassium permanganate related question. So please go ahead and check this out. All right, coming back to this, now let's take a look at potassium permanganate in acidic medium. In acidic medium, what does it do? In acidic medium, you will find that from sulfur dioxide, it is converting it to sulfuric acid. So let's say that we are taking sulfur dioxide. With sulfur dioxide, what are we taking? We are taking MnO4 minus. And from here, what is it going to get? What is it going to convert this? It is going to convert it to sulfuric acid, to SO4 2 minus. SO4 2 minus, this side, we have a 4 oxygen here, 4 oxygen here. So let's say that I am taking here 5SO2. If I take 5SO2, how many sulfuric acid I will get? This will be 5SO2 MnO4 minus. It is also going to form K2SO4 plus 2 MnSO4, right? So that means that 1, 1, and here you will have 3 sulfuric acid. Okay, all right. And this side you will have to add now H2O. Okay, this side you will have to add H2O. All right, so this is the first one. Second one, everybody, let's say second one, what else? Oxalate to carbon dioxide, that also happens, you know. Oxalates to carbon dioxide. So for oxalate, you know what is your oxalate? Oxalate is your basically C2O4 2 minus. And this, when it reacts with MnO4 minus, what will you get? This, when it reacts with MnO4 minus, you will be getting carbon dioxide. Yes. So here, let's say that you have 5 C2O4, it is going to give you 10 carbon dioxide. All right. Next, everybody. Next, everyone. Also remember always that if this is your MnO4 minus here, the difference in acidic medium is, as you know, band 153. So if it is MnO4 minus, that means this is in +7 oxidation state. It will only go to Mn plus 2. Yes, because the difference in the electrons is going to be 5, everybody. Remember this, okay? Next one is which one should we do for next one? Oxalic acid to carbon dioxide is over. I minus iodine, I minus to iodine. Let's see that how to take that. So let's say that you have 5 I minus, okay? You have 5 I minus. No, you cannot have 5 I minus. You have to have 10 I minus. If you take 10 I minus and if you take MnO4 minus, then what will you get? You will get 5I2 and of course Mn plus 2. Understood? So I think you can do this now. I think you can do this now for the acidic medium. Now, can I give you a homework? Can I please give you a homework, everybody? Yes. Please do it for ferrous sulfate to ferric sulfate. Ferrous sulfate to ferric sulfate. You do it just so that you can practice and you know that how many electrons change will happen. Now, this was acidic medium done. Okay, now let's come to the neutral medium. In neutral solution, what will happen? BaN153. So here the difference in the electrons, that will be how much? That will be 3. The difference will be 3. So that means that suppose if I take MnO4 minus, and if I take 2H2O, then with 3 electrons, the moment I have 3 electrons, what will happen? This is going to go to MnO2 plus 4OH minus. So if you take anything now, take anything with a charge, you can convert it because you know that it is only supposed to get 3 electrons. The difference has to be 3 electrons. Okay? Now let's go to alkaline medium. In alkaline medium, the difference is only 1, mere dear bacche. Yes, only 1, everybody. So now take a look at it. Alkaline medium we're taking, no? Alkaline medium, what will happen? Suppose you take KMNO4. You take KMNO4 plus let's say KOH you have taken. So what will happen? It will go to K2MnO4. Is that right? Yes, K2MnO4 plus you will get some amount of H2O. So now if you calculate the oxidation state, you will find that this is in +7 and this is in +6, everybody. Yes, so the difference is only a 1 electron. Therefore, the trick that I told you, band 153. Alright guys, now we have come across the F block elements. Now in the F block elements, you know that you have lanthanides and you have the actinides and both of them have 14 elements. Okay, what do they have? They have 14 elements. Their electronic configuration, general electronic configuration is 4F1 to 14, 5D0 to 1 and 6S2. Yes, and they are collectively called as a lanthanoids. Correct? So this is their electronic configuration. Now from here, what are the ones that you really need to know? You need to know about cerium. You need to know about neodymium, you need to know about europium, gadolinium, and you need to know about ytterbium. That's it. So these are the ones that they can ask you. They can ask you about their electronic configuration, and you should be knowing that cerium here, the moment cerium has lost 4 electrons, look at this, it comes to 4F0, which is a noble gas electronic configuration. So cerium does prefer 4F0. That means +4 oxidation state it can prefer. However, it has a tendency to get back to the +3 oxidation state and it wants to convert it to +3 oxidation state, which is the most common oxidation state of the lanthanoids. Okay. Now, the sum of the first 3 electron ionization energy for each element, as you see, it is very low. Therefore, their most common oxidation state is +3. Oxidation number you will also be able to see in +2 and +4 when, for example, when you get to see a noble gas configuration. Where will you see the noble gas configuration? Array, I have just told you Ce+4. Here you will see a half-filled F shell. When will you see a half-filled F shell? You will get to see that in europium 2+, and you will also get to see that in terbium +4. In both the cases, you will see F7. Next is a completely filled cell, completely filled F shell, right? Or F shell, let's write it. Why did I write level here? Anyway, don't worry about it. This you will be able to see when you see ytterbium in +2 oxidation state. You will see that this has a completely filled F shell. Okay. All right. Now, talking about atomic and ionic radii, we all know that there is a steady decrease in their atomic and ionic radii, which is why? Because of lanthanoid contraction. Now, these guys, their magnetic behavior, you don't calculate their magnetic momentum as just mu is equal to n multiplied with n plus 2. No, you cannot do that. Okay. Why? Because at this point of time, you also have to, you have another formula. Let me write the formula. The formula is mu is equal to 4s multiplied with s plus l plus capital L plus 1, and this root over that will give you the Bohr magneton. What is S here? S is the spin quantum number. S is the spin quantum number. All right. And what is L? L is the orbital quantum number. So in this case, you also have to make sure that you are considering the orbital quantum number, because it is necessary. Okay. All right. Now, chemical reactivity, but we just got to know, right? We just didn't we just get to know that they have +3 oxidation state. So you don't really have to remember it. Always take a look at it. See, take a look at it. Oxygen has an oxidation state of, oxygen shows a 2. Lanthanoids, they show 3, right? So O3 Ln2, do you understand? Ln2 O3. Similarly, with acids, they will release hydrogen. Yes. If they react with halogen, then they are going to form LnX3. If they react with H2O, then they are going to form basic. They are going to form alkalis, which will be LnOH3. If they react with carbon, they are going to form carbides. With nitrogen, you see, because both of them have +3 -3 oxidation state, it is going to cancel out. So it is going to be Ln. And for sulfur, it is again going to be Ln2S3. Got it? Okay. Now, this is one line that I have taken from NCERT, because I have seen that in the 2025, they have asked you this question regarding mish metal. Yes. So what happens is, a well-known alloy is mish metal, which consists of a lanthanoid metal 95% and iron 5% and traces of sulfur, carbon, calcium and aluminium. A good deal of mish metal is used in magnesium-based alloy to produce bullets, shell and lighter flint. Okay, so this has come in the examination, which is why I have taken this screenshot. Make sure that you study this also. Quickly, let us come to actinoids. Actinoids are thorium to lawrencium, everybody. Yes, they are radioactive elements. They show again +3 oxidation state is the most common, but apart from that, they do show +4, +5, +6 and +7 as well. Okay. All right, here also you will get to see a steady decrement in the atomic and ionic radii. This is called as actinoid contraction, just like the lanthanoid contraction. And here you don't really need to remember their electronic configuration, because they don't ask it. But still, just at least go through the names of the elements, because that is going to be important. Magnetic behavior, exactly similarly, we are going to measure it just like the lanthanoids here, and they do show higher magnetic momentum as well. Chemical reactivity is once again same, as you all can see that these guys also show +3 oxidation state. So it is going to be An3O8, AnX4, AnH3, no reaction with alkalis, AnH3, ANO2, no reaction with nitric acid, and with hydrochloric acid they form AnCl3. Okay. Last but not the least, there is a basic difference between lanthanoids and actinoids that I have written here. What you can do is just go through it just to know the differences. Not that they will be asking you in the JEE mains examination. However, it is important. So that's all for today. Thank you so much. Not gonna take more time than this, but it has been a longer time. Sorry for that. And yes, tada bye bye. All the very best. I'll see you in the live session. Bye.